To say Sonic was in a tight spot in the early 2000s wouldn't be incorrect. There's just so many better ways of saying that Sonic was screwed, like Sonic is screwed, things couldn't get worse, Billy Hatcher and the Big Egg. The early 2000s were a time of change and experimentation for the Sonic series. The decade was probably the most experimental in its whole history. We got games like Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic Riders, Sonic and the Black Knight, Sonic Unleashed, and a whole bunch more. I think these games have their own merit, but it's undeniable how much of a shakeup it was from just a few years prior. Some say variety is the spice of life, but others might say that the Sonic series was a bit too seasoned for its own good. Instead of feeling like progress and advances were being made in the franchise, they seemed more like sidesteps made from a lack of stability or confidence. However, they were able to mask it relatively well as out-of-the-box thinking, and in a sense it was. But this methodology didn't come from curiosity and a drive for innovation, but instead it came from a fear of being left in the dust by the competition. Sonic had to take risks if he was ever going to be as highly regarded as he was in the 90s. This age of insecurity came due to the failure of Sega as a hardware developer and manufacturing company, and in a way, Sega was repeating many of the same mistakes from their history in the console business. Except this time, it was through the last cash cow that they had, the Sonic series. Sega's fall from grace is so poetic it's almost biblical how all the pieces fell into place in just the worst ways possible. They went from holding a majority share of the video game industry to a third-party software developer in under a decade. Sega's whole history is a roller coaster. They've seen towering highs, the deepest lows, and some really lukewarm in-betweens. Being known primarily as an arcade game developer, their first foray into the worldwide console business followed in similar footsteps with the Sega Master System. Arcade ports were very prevalent on the console, and its competitor the NES focused more on games that were suited for an at-home experience. The Master System did okay, but it was overshadowed by the NES in almost every single region. In a way, the Master System was doing its own thing and not trying to directly compete and compare with the NES, at least as far as the library was concerned. But instead of making better software so they could compete with Nintendo, they decided that it was the hardware that needed changing, even though the Master System was more than capable of standing toe-to-toe with the NES. But matching the competition wasn't going to be enough. They had to blow them out of the water, and 2 years after the Master System was released, a new console was made to directly compete with the NES, that being the Sega Genesis. This is what really got their foot in the door of not just the consumer, but also the cultural zeitgeist as well. Its first few years were still filled with arcade ports, but their business model switched up with the introduction of Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991. It was a system seller metaphorically because it finally had a mascot to call its own, but it was also a system seller literally because it replaced the pack-in game that came with the console. People were finally turning their heads to look at these new guys, and Sega struck while the iron was hot with a sequel to Sonic 1 the following year. Things were finally looking up for Sega with the highly anticipated Sonic 2, which would go on to be one of the most revered entries in the entire series. But 1992 also marked the year that Sega started making really bad choices. Sega's downfall started with the release of the Sega CD after Sonic 2 came out. It boasted full motion video graphics, high storage capacities, better quality audio, and a whole bunch more features. It was ahead of its time not because of how revolutionary it was, but instead of how rushed it was. You had to own a Genesis just to get the thing to turn on, and it cost over twice as much as a stock Genesis at the time. People complained that the games weren't as different as those found on the Genesis, and those that were different weren't widely enjoyed. The Sega CD was seen in the public eye in a similar way to the Atari 5200, a disappointing and expensive piece of hardware that couldn't justify its own existence. But Sega kept going and actually got stronger. Maybe the Sega CD was just going to be a one-off experiment, and at least they know better now. It was only 1992 and the Genesis would still be a support for the next half a decade. In 1994, Sega had gone from a nobody who couldn't hold a candle to Nintendo to owning over half of the video game industry in less than 8 years. The Genesis was 6 years old at this point and started to look a little bit outdated compared to the SNES and the 3DO, but it didn't matter. Their aggressive ad campaigns and great line of software they released around the time aided in their takeover of the gaming industry. They had to just focus on software and everything would be perfect. The first E3 took place being more similar to a press conference than a public convention. Nintendo showed off their Virtual Boy system, which was failing to impress. Then Sega came up showing off their new system, the Sega Saturn. Despite being touted as the successor to the Genesis, it seemed to be doing much of the same stuff as the year's previous 3DO and Atari Jaguar. Nothing bad, but nothing crazy. However, this lukewarm console came with a fat price tag of $400. If that wasn't a big enough shock, it was also announced that the system was available for purchase that day. They launched a console on a whim, just to surprise an audience. They were under the impression that people would flock to stores to buy one, but little did they know the games that were supposed to come out were still deep in development, and a whole bunch of stores refused to sell it because of the surprise launch. Needless to say that this made Sega look even more greedy and out of touch than they were when they released the Sega CD 3 years previous, which had since lost much of Sega's support. After Nintendo and Sega were done making idiots of themselves, these new guys Sony came up and wanted to show off their little machine that they've been tinkering with, known as the PlayStation. The Sony spokesman gave an intentionally boring presentation just so they could set up this one guy for the perfect moment of his entire career.
299.
I can't overstate how important this event was for the gaming industry. This one line changed the course of electronic entertainment forever. Nintendo and Sega collectively shat themselves. Yes, Sega was first out the door, much like most of the other times, but who's gonna buy a system with no games? An idiot. And that's what they were hoping everybody was. If that didn't hurt enough, guess when the Sega Saturn released? November 22nd. Okay, guess what happened a day before that? The 32X released.
You're shitting me.
So they released two really expensive home consoles back to back with almost no games and barely supported either of them after launch. Sonic had a few games planned for them, but no traditional Sonic platformer came out for either system. Sega basically died that night, and the following years were just the funeral march. In 1998, they gave hardware one last go with the Dreamcast. And yeah, it was cool and based and sexy, but at this point too many bridges had been burned. Why would anyone buy a new console that would just be outdated before any games even came out for it? The Dreamcast could have been the best console ever made, and it still would have failed in the first 2 years. Okay, picture this. Imagine if Microsoft releases the Xbox One, and it kicks ass and everybody loves it. Then they step things up a little bit 3 years later and release the Xbox 2 at $900, which required that you had the Xbox One in order to play it. And not only that, there were barely any games for it. Then 2 years after that, they released the Xbox 3 and 4 on the same day, with one being $400 and the other one being $900. And you know what? There's even less games, and the Xbox 3 requires that you have the Xbox One to even work. And for some games, it would require even the Xbox 2 as well. So to play certain games, you'd have to spend the equivalent of $1,700 for all the necessary hardware. And you know what you got to play for that?
Your ball, Junior! I like it. Outstanding.
You see how ridiculous this is? It's insane that people were able to put up with this for even a second. This is why Sega doesn't make consoles anymore. They bit the hand that fed them, and people weren't going to give a second chance to a company that already spent 3 or 4 of them. So basically, Sega makes video game, says big number, Sony comes up, says small number, CEO of Sega creams his chunch, and then no more Sega. After the Dreamcast died, they put out one last Sonic game. Yeah, I guess for a profit, but it was almost like an olive branch more than anything. One last Sonic game for the people that stuck around with them until the end. The 10th anniversary of Sonic was bittersweet. I mean, yeah, you got a really cool new Sonic game, but as far as everybody knew, this was gonna be the last one. And for a while it was. You wanna know what happens next?
Game Boy.
Sonic Advance hit store shelves around the time that Sega was closing down shop for hardware. Dang, so now we got Sega closing, Luigi's Mansion, Freddy Got Fingered, Master of Disguise, and Saw all happening in 2001. Jeez, what a freaky year.
Terrorist activities.
So yeah, Sonic Advance was epic and cool and swag, and honestly a breath of fresh air for a lot of people, especially those that never even played a Sonic game. Old fans got nostalgia for the classic titles, and new players got a taste of what Sonic was always meant to be. For a lot of people, this was their first Sonic game, and while it isn't true for me, I love the Advance series, and I want to cover it someday. The other Sonic game that was a lot of people's first in the series was Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, an enhanced port for the GameCube. Despite being a port, so many more people played it this way than on the Dreamcast. So much so that it's the best-selling non-first-party Nintendo game on the system. This showed Sega that people still want Sonic games. It's almost like they should have focused on software, like literally every other company was doing at the time. Well, I guess all the companies that actually made it out alive. Sega and Sonic Team got to work making a new Sonic game, but this one wouldn't be Adventure 3. Instead, they were going to do something different. Reinvent the wheel in some ways, but also take a few pages from their history books too. And the results spoke for themselves. Hey guys, it's me, Peanut Butter Gamer. So I got a few updates for you. I swear it's gonna be really quick. I recently opened a Redbubble and I got some cool shirts and stickers and stuff, so check it out or let me know if there's a design you want to see. I got Sky the Bunny Dude, I got Wade, I got Wade avoiding taxes. Second, I've been working a whole bunch on projects like Hot Job 94, some cartoons, and some other stuff. So if you want to be the first to see news on the stuff that I'm making, like this, check out my Patreon or YouTube memberships if you prefer that. It really means so much to me and it helps a lot with development, so really any tiny bit goes a long way. You also get a bunch of other perks too, like art, community polls, early demos for beta testing, and more. So yeah, check it out. Also, thanks so much for sticking around. It's super motivating and I really appreciate you guys. Did you guys know that Sonic Heroes ran on the same engine as Tony Hawk Underground?
Check this out.
Sonic Heroes was released on January 6, 2004 to commemorate the Hedgehog's 13th year and 365th birthday. It got middling reception, and it becomes abundantly clear why that is the further you get in the game. There's stuff to love about it, no doubt, but there's also a whole bunch of stuff that just gives me old Patsy a twist, if you know what I mean. Not to say that it's boring or anything, far from it actually. It was just as much nostalgic as it was innovative for the franchise. 3 playable characters at the same time, 12 playable characters to choose from? It was wild, and it piqued a whole lot of people's curiosity. For many, this was going to be their introduction to the Sonic series, so Sega knew that they had to make an impression that would last. Alright, Sonic Heroes, time to play as Sonic and Team Sonic and Sonic Heroes. I beat Pink Mode first. Sonic games were way harder when I was a kid. I mean, when I got Mega Collection, I couldn't beat the Green Hills boss. I couldn't get past Chemical Plant. I kept drowning in Hydrocity because apparently you can't jump when a fish is biting you. I was too impressed with the 3D of the Eggmobile to keep Sonic alive. The only classic Sonic games I ever got far in or even beat were Spinball, Mean Bean, and 3D Blast. And you know what? I honestly think those games matter to me more than the original trilogy. But I'm a big guy now, and as big guys, there's a little industry secret, we play Sonic mode. So we start off in Utah where we find Sonic running. Tails sees Sonic and gives him a letter that Eggman sent to his P.O. box. Eggman printed a GIF and threatened Sonic using a funny meme font. You'll realize that this time around, things are a lot less intense. I mean, Eggman says he's gonna conquer the world, and so the stakes are still high, but it really doesn't feel all that high. In Sonic Adventure 1, we got the police trying to shoot an ancient water god of destruction. In Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic got captured by the United States government in order to save face from the public who thinks he's connected to
Worldwide terrorist activities.
In Sonic Heroes,
Guess what, Sonic? I'm going to put a peanut in the cashew bowl at church this Sunday. Think you can stop me?
it just doesn't feel the same. And you know, it doesn't have to be. This isn't an adventure game, it's doing its own thing, so I'm gonna judge it based on what it is and not what it isn't. Okay, so first off, the game is structured similarly to the classic games with 2 acts and then a boss. You go everywhere from the beaches, to the cities, to casinos, canyons, forests, castles, and lastly to Eggman's ship. Comparing to previous Sonic games, Sonic 1 had 18 stages, Sonic 2 had 20 stages, Sonic 3 and Knuckles had 24 stages, Heroes got 14, and you play each of them 4 times. You know, I was comparing it to the classic games, because it's more styled like those, and it tried to distance itself from the adventure games, but Adventure 2 had 32 stages. Okay, there may be less stages here, but the ones it does have are larger. Much larger. I think a little too large. Honestly, some of these stages could have been cut in half, and I think they would have been much better paced. I have no idea why they didn't do that. It seems like a short game in the worst way possible, but also seems long in the worst way possible as well. Instead of having 14 5-minute levels, having 28 2.5-minute levels would have been so much better for pacing. It gives the illusion of a longer game in a good way, and also you don't have to leave the players wishing that the levels would just end. And I mean, this is just my opinion, and I don't know anything, and I mean, after hearing about what the level designer went through just to get the game out, I'm surprised we even got what we did. After Tails crashes into a national monument, we go to the beach where the game starts proper. Immediately, you'll see the classic Sonic influence through the level aesthetics, and this stays a constant for the majority of the game. The level design is more in line with the adventure games, though. While stages in Adventure 1 were built with the idea of multiple characters going through them organically, Seaside Hill has far less in common with Emerald Coast than it does with Jungle Japes from DK64, where an Adventure 1 stage will have you go on a path for each character. Heroes will have you go down a path and switch to a character that will arbitrarily change the way that the level is completed. What I mean by that is, let me put it this way. There's no reason for the cannon to shoot you this way when you play as Sonic and only Sonic, but it still does. And then the way it shoots you is different when you play as Tails. Now there are parts throughout the game that use each of their abilities, but these act more like stopgaps where you'll have a big chasm, so you have to switch for Tails just to get over it, and then switch back to Sonic. I don't think this is using characters in their best way. Tails used to be able to traverse level geometry in a way that only he could. Flying around a map changes the way that you interact with the stage. You still fly in this game, but is it really that much different than just a big jump? Knuckles is the same way. In previous games he was able to glide and climb on walls, but here his special ability is that he can get blown up on turbines. It feels like such backwards design, kind of like those doors that only open when a certain projectile is shot at them in DK64. It only makes sense in the context that it's a game, and it needs to block you from a certain area unless you do a specific action that only one character can do. This is even true for Sonic, where in the previous game he was able to use a spin dash to clear level chunks. Now he's stuck with this rocket excel that has to be used a collective 2 times in the whole game. And even then, it's in a spot that required me to use it for no other reason than to justify its existence. This lock and key methodology is so unlike a Sonic game, and it's completely counterintuitive to the core design. Everyone has a different definition of what a Sonic game is, but I'm almost positive that people won't say the Sonic is best when you stop repeatedly to swap characters so a door can open. I'm sure you noticed by now, but this is the first Sonic game that introduces mid-level dialogue throughout every stage. It was present in Canon's Core from Adventure 2, but that was the last stage and it was far less prevalent. Most of the time these guys are just commenting on how to take care of an enemy, interact with the stage, get over an obstacle, or they just insert their own thoughts on what's going on. I can imagine some people won't be big fans of this because they might feel it interrupts the main gameplay, or maybe it gets annoying after a while, but I think it's charming. They tried to add more personality for these guys, probably due to the fact that Heroes has far less cutscenes than both Adventure 1 and 2. I guess they thought to just have the cutscenes be within the levels themselves by making the characters talk to each other. I honestly like its addition, and it helps you get more accustomed with their personalities, even though you'll only be seeing their back for like 90% of the game. Also, for whatever reason, when you hit the goal ring, your characters do a little dance or a pose for a few seconds in complete silence, and then the level finished music starts. I don't think this was an oversight because the same thing happens in Adventure 2, but not Adventure 1 surprisingly. It's just so awkward. Why don't they have the music play at the same time instead of one after the other? It just comes across as really disconnected. I mean, even in Shadow the Hedgehog, they realized what they were doing and they fixed it for that game.
Disgusting black creatures, get out of my sight.
I mean, it's not a big issue, it's just an unusual choice. Seaside Hill for a majority of the runtime is great and it barely shows any of the issues that are basically hallmarks of Sonic Heroes, but those will become much more prevalent as the game continues. Next up we have Sea Palace. This is much the same as the last stage, only with a bit less natural landforms. It's kind of like you come across this small Atlantean civilization. It's a cool aesthetic all around. It's a bit less open and a little bit more streamlined, except for when you get to this turtle section. To cross over the waters, you have to choose which turtles to hop across, and you do this by jumping into the different cannons with one of the 3 characters. It's kind of like a split pathway, but in the most literal and rudimentary way possible. It is a cool visual though. One thing that becomes glaringly obvious as the game continues is that it's really hard to get A ranks, and honestly I love that. It's not like the modern Sonic games where it just kind of gives it to you for not even trying. I hate when games just patronize me like, whoa, you beat the game in 4 hours.
Wow, that's incredible!
I much prefer when a game is ridiculously hard than ridiculously easy, because if something's too easy, then why do it at all? I've heard a lot of people take issue with the controls of Sonic Heroes, saying that they're too slippery, and while I do agree with them on certain things, I don't think it controls badly. The acceleration is through the roof, and the turning sensitivity at high speeds has been increased, leading to a lot of moments where you can feel like you're just on ice. I much prefer the Adventure 1 or 2 controls, but for what they are, Sonic Heroes could have controlled a whole lot worse. The problems with the controls make themselves more apparent as the game goes on, and the reliance on bottomless pits for challenge becomes more prevalent, but for Sea Palace, it's still going strong. Next we have the Egg Hawk. So this is the first boss of the game, and it's unlike the 99% of all Eggman bosses that came before it. It's most similar to the first boss in Sonic and Knuckles, only there's no stage obstacles, and they gave him turrets. Eggman keeps flying away from me, but if he gets too far away, he'll come back, and he'll go all, over here, hit me, hit me. If you do follow him, he ends up stopping to spin in these little arenas. Taking out the rotors doesn't really matter because they don't affect the boss's total health though. I mean, you can take out both of them to hear Eggman scream, oh no! Both rotors are gone! And he'd just be a sitting duck at that point that can't really go anywhere, so it's kinda unfair. When you do finally take off his last bit of health, his lips get paralyzed so he can't say certain words.
This is the end!
This is Grand Metropolis, and basically the chemical plant of heroes. Here we're introduced to rail grinding, and it's a far cry from the rail grinding in Adventure 2. First of all, the balance mechanic is completely gone and never to be seen in a future game. Instead of crouching, you have the B button to make you do a little spin. Granted, it gives you a little bit of speed, but you have nowhere near as much control as how fast you could go compared to Adventure 2. But at least you do a little spin like... That stinks. The problems that come with this new grinding system get far more prevalent a few stages later, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. There's far more of an emphasis on combat from here on out. Certain areas and even progression are blocked off until you beat all the robots. Sometimes it's just one of them that you have to beat, so if you really want to skip through, you can just beat the last enemy, or maybe the last few. Occasionally that's all a door needs to open because it only checks for the closest robots. But sometimes you really do need to destroy all of them. The first time around it's not really an issue, but is beating the robots really so fun that you want to repeat these areas if you lose a life? It just means you have to stay in the same spot and spam the jump button for 20 seconds. It doesn't sound like a lot, but this really does add up as it goes on. The level also introduces enemies that only certain characters can defeat. Gold-plated turtle robots need to be turned upside down before you can attack them. Even when Tails or Knuckles is at max level, it doesn't matter. You can wail on them until the cows come home. That thing is staying put. I'm not the biggest fan of these kind of character-specific enemies because it railroads you into a specific choice in a game all about playing how you want. I understand that for stage obstacles like chasms, they can only be flown over, but I don't really think it works as much here. The music here rocks though, and you'll see that that's a constant for a majority of the levels. Occasionally, some of them do go for more atmosphere than energy, making for some tonal whiplash when going from one stage to the next. It kind of reminds me of the Sonic CD soundtracks, where the Japanese and the European ones went for a more high-energy house vibe, while the US got a much more subdued and atmospheric soundtrack. Both of these are amazing, but I find myself more siding with the strange ambience of the US soundtrack. In Heroes, I'm kind of the opposite. I prefer the more bouncy and upbeat songs here, because they just match more with the pace of the game far better. Cool stage overall, not many complaints. Next we have Power Plant, and combat is shown here a bit more obnoxiously. While in Grand Metropolis you needed to stop every minute or so, it's nearly every single room, which leads to a lot of stop and go gameplay. I mean, it's not like Marble Zone. I mean, there's still speed and certain areas can be skipped, but if there were skips all over the level, I could forgive it. It would reward a player who doesn't want to stand around in the event that they're familiar enough with the controls. But so many of these spots have infinite walls that you can't jump over or pass through unless the enemies are beaten. This is another instance where the player is forced to go by the game's speed for no reason than to add another minute or so to the game's final runtime. The two spots where this is the most egregious of the elevator segments. This isn't Metal Slug or Scott Pilgrim. This is shallow and unnecessary. When I was a kid, I thought they were cool because the floor lit up and I loved that kind of shit. But now I realize it's like 45 seconds where you stay put and occasionally attack enemies. Kind of like those combat arenas in Donkey Kong 64. Come to think of it, a bunch of games around the time just had a whole bunch of unnecessary combat arenas just to pad out the game. Combat can be fun, but when it's just run around, spam B, and then run around again, it gets really monotonous. It's more just a war between your attention span and however many guys they send out to go boo. The music here, much like Grand Metropolis, is great. It's perfect for the area. I do think it's a bit short of a loop. I mean, Grand Metropolis was short too, but I mean, this one's like 30 seconds, so you're gonna be hearing quite a bit. This is such a non-complaint, I'm sorry. One thing I wasn't a fan of as a kid, and I'm still not a fan of, is the energy tank segment right at the very end of the stage. The final climb is the first instance of the game throwing a time-sensitive curveball at you. You gotta platform to the top, take out enemies, and fly up the chimney, all while the lava is trailing behind you. It comes out of nowhere, and most people are probably gonna freak out a little when they see it, and they're gonna die thinking about how unfair it was. I'm most people, specifically when I was like 4 or 5. I like to take games at my own speed unless a precedent is set at the beginning of the stage. Like if it starts with an auto-scroller, it's fine, but if it turns into one a few seconds before the stage finishes, it's jarring and challenging in a way I don't think is earned. Here it kind of teeters on that fine line of okay and... I don't know. Regardless, once you bounce up to the top, the hatch closes and you finally end the stage. After that we see Amy and she's just like, "Hey, Sonic, I'm going to kiss you." And then Sonic's just like... I really think they just put these in here to advertise for the battle mode, but is the battle mode really worth advertising when this is what you're getting? It's not even a real fight, it's just push the button until they die, or you die, or you turn the game off. So Sonic beats up an obese man and the 2 little girls that he follows behind. Yay. Next up we have Casino Park, and I gotta say, the aesthetics here are so amazing and they hold up fantastically. Really, the whole game looks incredible, at least in terms of the level aesthetics. It's kind of like TF2, where even though it's like 20 years old, it still looks like it could have come out like yesterday or a few years ago just because of how timeless the art style is. What didn't age so gracefully was the pinball controls. These even sucked when it was brand new. The camera angle primarily used is this weird upshot look that makes it easy to orient yourself where you want to go, but when you start falling, you have no idea where you could be headed. I think this is why there aren't any pinball tables in the stage that lead to bottomless pits. They knew it was an uphill battle to sell everybody on the pinball controls in this game, even when they couldn't get it right back in Adventure 1. What makes even less sense is that they had a perfectly good camera angle for the raised portions of the pinball tables, and they barely use them at all. Now, why they didn't use this angle for every table is beyond me, but it's just so bizarre that they're going to make a unique and objectively superior camera angle, and it's only going to be used one time, and for all other parts you're just going to get the shitty view. The areas on foot are fun, but they're just so few and far between. It seems that the level got too caught up in the visuals and forgot to make sure that it was fun. The music's good, but it can only take you so far when so much of the level's runtime is spent fighting with the pinball controls and the subpar view. Bingo Highway starts with its best foot forward. Right out of the gate, it's better because the visibility is in the player's favor. Not only this, but you have an objective on the rolling tables. By hitting different numbered chips, you can clear areas on the bingo card, getting you more rings. It's simple, but it's really fun trying to figure out which numbers you need to aim for. These are just a spectacle, but it's interactable in more ways than just a standard loop or an automated trail that was in Adventure 1 or 2. However, while it is more interactive, the pinball controls are largely unchanged, which leads to the player pushing a direction and they move either too much or not at all. The player's movement sensitivity is entirely dependent on variables that aren't in the player's control. Now, this wouldn't be so bad if there weren't death pits all over these tables. While they get more prevalent towards the end, the fact that they're here is inexcusable. They knew that the ball rolling controls were lackluster, which is why there weren't death pits on the pinball tables. I guess they thought, oh, they can see now. Let's give certain parts of the table holes and cut fat ass chunks out of them so they get anxious. And if they fall in, that just means they get to play more pinball, and those kids love pinball. We made a whole game for it. The music here is... It's not as melodic as the others, and it's far more focused on conveying that feeling that you're in a high-speed casino theme park, but this comes at the cost of the song being like... It's just kind of noises a whole lot of the time. I'm sure it has its fans, but I wouldn't be counted amongst them. It's only distracting if you really stop to listen, but if you're just kind of playing through, you kind of forget it's there. Overall, the stage is better than Casino Park, but honestly, the high contrast of the bright colors hurts my eyes a little. And I know, oh boo-hoo, the level's too bright. How about you play Go to Bed Simulator? I hear there's a new Pillow DLC. And a blanky expansion pack. It's an okay time, but you start to see the real cracks of the game start to show. After that, we have a boss battle in big quotation marks. Here we have another Eggman encounter, but instead of seeing a big sexy robot that he drives, you get a combat arena. It's just to test your patience, but I will say I do like when everyone's leveled up and you can just trash loads of them all at once. Seeing all the wreckage and the particles on screen is really cool, and it's pretty much the only redeeming quality for these enemy gauntlets. There is one thing I wish they added. Eggman constantly floats around the arena kind of far away, but I wish that if you hit him, it would cause a screen nuke. It would kind of add some cool challenge to players who just want to get this stuff over with as fast as possible. After the combat arena, we're taken to Rail Canyon. Here's where the designers thought they were cute and they made a whole level with rails. They've done it before with Final Chase and Final Rush, but here the level's far more horizontal rather than being downhill. This combined with the simplified controls lead to a lot of time where you're just pushing B over and over waiting for the next platforming section. I know this kind of sounds unimportant, but the rail grinding in this game just isn't very engaging at all. The biggest switch up from this stage is the introduction of these pseudo-puzzles. It gives you the illusion that you're solving something by switching these tracks, but in all instances except one, you're just kind of moving forward and the puzzle solves itself. If this was intended as a spectacle, I really like it, but as a puzzle, it leaves a lot to be desired. For most people, they consider this to be the stage that marks the decline for the rest of the game, but I still think you can have fun with it. After that is Bullet Station. This stage does away with the slight puzzle aspects of Rail Canyon and instead focuses on these tunnels and canyons. The tunnels are fun because they offer some visual variety while still maintaining the core gameplay. The canyons aren't as fun because they focus entirely on a spectacle and have almost no gameplay. In the tunnels, you can still do everything because it's still standard gameplay. The canyons only let you move left and right, not like there's any obstacles for Team Sonic. It's just 20 seconds of waiting until you can play again, and right at the end, you have to make sure you land on the rail, because if you don't, you have to redo a portion of the stage along with that cannon segment. The music is a touch better than the previous stage though. It's far more dingy, but still melodic enough to get into. Finally, we get another true boss fight. So Eggman comes in, starts beatboxing like Lucy Diamond Eyes, and he shoots you and runs away. That's it. It's literally the Egg Hawk, but now it's on a blimp, and then detaches and pussies off. It's so unnecessary. I wish for the next boss, it was like, just put a car on the bottom. So it's like a car, and then a blimp, and then this big hawk thing, and then Eggman just riding on the top of it. It does kind of remind me of the Sega hardware, like, Tower of Power that they released in the 90s of just all this stuff. It is kind of ridiculous in the same way. I love Frog Forest. This is kind of like the Starlight Zone of the game. It's just relaxed and not super in your face. It's not easy, but it's not really a hassle either. It's a good middle ground in almost every scale. It does have these little flying flower segments that operate similar to the cannons in Bullet Station. These I'd argue are a bit more visually interesting because they don't just push you forward. They do offer just as little gameplay though. Fly up, fly down, but other than that it's just a 20-second or so break from regular gameplay. Luckily, like Bullet Station, they don't use them super often, so for what they are, they're fine, perfectly inoffensive, and mostly non-intrusive, much like the stage as a whole. One part I'm not as big of a fan of are the grinding segments. So they decided to widen the grind spline so it has that more planty vine look, kind of like in Tarzan, but the hitbox for the rails stays exactly the same, meaning that you have to land on it with the same precision that you needed for the metal rails. Don't be deceived by their thick look. If you don't land in the exact middle of the vine, you're gonna fall. It doesn't matter if you're standing on the side or close to the middle. You will phase through it as if it's not even there. Had the hitbox been wider, I'd honestly love it, but it's the fact that it deceives you with the impression that it'll be more forgiving that makes me dislike it. But overlooking the grind vines, a majority of this stage is pretty fun. It's a brisk run through the canopies of the mushrooms, and it's got a relaxing atmosphere to go along with it. I like this stage quite a bit. Lost Jungle. It's bad. Next up we have Hang Castle. Okay, first of all, music. Sonic games always got good music. This game too, most of them range from great to really great. The music in Lost Jungle, if you could call it that, just sounds like a whole bunch of pre-recorded early 2000s Nokia text tones playing at random. I guess it's supposed to be super atmospheric, but like, really? This? At least with Frog Forest you had a little something. It wasn't amazing, but at least it was like a song. This one just, I don't know. I don't hate it. It's just, it doesn't really fit with the rest of the game. The other thing that nearly everyone will walk away with feelings about is the final stretch. The alligator section introduces one of the few shit tests that this game throws at you. I guess they've appeared before this stage, but they weren't as abrupt and halting as this one right here, and that's why I call it the first. Shit tests typically happen right at the end of the stage and serve as one final obstacle that separates you from the goal ring. These obstacles have been in other Sonic games before, namely the gun truck in Sonic Adventure 2, but here's how they handled the shit test here. In this section you have to push A at the right time in order to hop from vine to vine. But you don't tap A at the height of your momentum. You tap A right at the very end of the swing when visually you've lost all of your speed. Here's what I mean. I would assume that you have to jump off the vine here when you're moving the fastest, but no, you have to jump off right at the very end of the motion. Most people would think that this just drops you down because you have no forward velocity, because you slowed down right at the apex of the swing. Instead, you get shot forward as if you had the momentum you just lost a second ago. If they allowed for the A press to be while the vine was between the points of where letting go makes sense and the end of the swing, that would be far more charitable. But no, you have to rewire your brain to let go of the vine when it makes the least sense. Almost like that was the challenge in the first place. It's like, imagine for the final obstacle, you had to do a rhythm game, but not only that, all of your presses had to be delayed by half a second instead of keeping up with the song.
That's fucking stupid!
So you gotta do quite a lot just to pass through Lost Jungle. Now let's compare it to City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2. You roll under the fence and you have to run away from the gun truck that follows close behind you. You wanna know how you beat this? You press down. It acts more like a spectacle than a challenge because SA2 realizes by throwing a new kind of obstacle at the player right before the stage ends that's super dangerous, it'll probably piss the player off. A similar spectacle happens in the last stage of SA2 where you have to run away from falling debris, but I actually think this part's easier than the gun truck. I don't even know if it's possible to get hurt here, and that's because it knows it's a spectacle that doesn't try to catch you off guard with strange mechanics that don't mesh well with the rest of the game. That's why you don't swing on poles for 30 seconds to get away from the gun truck. Oops. City Escape doesn't want to waste your time with a needlessly cryptic and difficult hurdle just to catch new players off guard and make them go, "You're shitting me." This is the kind of stuff that makes people hate your game. You're better than this. Fuck you! I'm sorry. I don't hate Sonic Heroes. I just didn't like that part. Hang Castle rocks, man. This level has these gravity puzzles that are basically just as much puzzles as those found in Rail Canyon, but I think they're handled actually better here. It's much more of a spectacle dancing around as if it's a puzzle, and honestly it's not a bad thing. For example, you come to a door that won't open, so you break some blocks and press a switch to flip gravity. You go on the upside down section where you press a switch to open the door where you then fall right back down where you started, in front of the door, which is now open. It's able to weave this straightforward path that gives you the illusion that you went on your own way to solve the puzzle, or open the door, but it's mostly a facade. It's a hallway that's faking openness really hard, and it does a great job at it. The upside down mechanic is so cool, and the aesthetics of the castle are some of the best in the series. I really wish this place came back, if not as a true revival, as some kind of level inspired by it. I mean, everyone was doing creepy haunted houses at the time. Mario did it, Banjo-Kazooie did it, Bill Cosby did it. This stage has some of the most creative elements and areas for the whole game, like where you'll run through a loop on one side and then revisit it by grinding on the underside of it. Hang Castle rocks, it's a standout level from the game. Mystic Mansion. Not you as much. Well, maybe it is a standout level, but not for good reasons. Firstly, Mystic Mansion is super boxed in and claustrophobic. I know they wanted you to go into the mansion for this level, but this was really not the best way to do it. It's much more restrictive, and instead of the puzzles being like, oh, okay, now I gotta do this, it's more like, wrong. Do it again. But it does have this minecart section that reminds me a whole lot of the Bullet Station one, except not as fun. It looks cooler without a doubt, but the freedom of going left and right is lost in favor of this forward movement. It turns a fun challenge of jumping when you see the lasers to ha ha ha, jump asshole, ooh, great moves, you almost dodged it. Mystic Mansion looks great, but there's a lot of stuff working against it. This is without even bringing up the final stretch of the level. Honestly, it's some of the scummiest design I've ever seen in a Sonic game. This is so far beyond shit test. This crosses into the territory of what the fuck is actually wrong with Sonic Team. They have these switches that need to be pressed in order to open the last gate to the goal ring, but in order to reach those switches, you have to do specific tasks as each character. Flying with Tails over a pit isn't a problem. Gliding with Knuckles is a bit shaky, but passable. Sonic's section is that you have to do homing attacks across the pit by locking onto these enemies who are notorious for just leaving in the middle of an attack, costing you a life. And Sonic Team knew that this was a fickle bitch, because why else would they have you do it as the last thing in the level? It's cause they knew it would be glitchy, cost you a few lives, possibly game over, and it would make you play the level over again just to inflate the runtime. Right at the end. If this was at the beginning of the stage, it would be more understandable because it would be establishing that you can do this as the status quo. But it's the fact that they sneak it in right at the end because they knew. If the homing attack worked properly, this part wouldn't be hard and probably wouldn't have been included at the end. But they put it in because of how bullshit these enemies' homing attack targets are. Besides that part, the level is fine, but factoring that part in, it's not looking good. After that, we get another enemy gauntlet, and it's just as boring as the last one. But it's got some more visual flair in the form of blasting to new areas and seeing new architecture. Other than that, it's just monotonous and only serves to fill a non-existent gap. Egg Fleet. Egg Fleet. Holy shit. This has to be one of the best 3D Sonic stages ever made. It's like Final Rush from SA2, but somehow even better. Final Rush is a mix of rail grinding and grounded segments, but Egg Fleet is able to segment the rail areas and the ship areas in such a way that there's so much of a better sense of flow and progression. The rails in SA2 were super fun, but oftentimes it felt like a crapshoot whether I'd land on them or not. They're so skinny, and too many times it just felt like having to thread a needle. Making the rails have this tube shape makes the player feel far less anxious when hopping onto it because of how much thicker it is. The extra real estate from the tube thickness gives the player more wiggle room than a skinny rail could ever provide. For whatever reason, it's easier to land on these tubes than it is to land on the vines in Frog Forest. Now, I don't know if that was an oversight or because they wanted to make this level amazing. Egg Fleet does have a few stopgaps, but besides those, it's one of the best levels in the entire game, if not the best. How did you guys take one of the best Sonic levels ever from one of the best Sonic games and then do it better? Where was this the past 10 or so levels? Rail Canyon wishes it could be this cool. And I just wish the design philosophy was more present in the earlier stages. It doesn't help that this masterpiece is immediately followed up by Final Fortress. Let's talk about it. This is the last level of the game, and I mean it certainly fits the part in terms of the looks. The atmosphere is second to none, and they nailed the huge dark warship location. Unfortunately, it's one of the most boring levels in the whole game. It's nearly all straightforward with very few turns, and for a game like Sonic Unleashed, this works perfectly, but when giving it to a game that's more focused on being open, it just gives it this really boring hallway effect. There's no sugarcoating it. It's straightforward. The level's supposed to take place between the crevices of a ship's wing, and that sounds amazing. It gives it this grandiose scale and really makes you feel small by comparison. But I think the stage design kind of gets lost for the spectacle in this case. If we went through the sides of the wing and ended up on another end of the ship, it would have been much more visually interesting, or at least a turn of some kind. Just something. At the moment, it's just big, and it works, yeah, but I mean, there's so much more that could have been done. Oh, also, you know those different paths that were everywhere in Egg Fleet? You got one route forward, and that's the path everyone will go on. And that'd be okay if it was a fast-paced stage, but the amount of stopgaps and enemy gauntlets turn what could have been a really cool final mission into a slow slog that constantly has you asking when the next door's gonna close. and how many big O fuckbots you'll have to take care of. It does have these little laser segments, and for as small and insignificant as they are, they do offer some cool transitions between the robot chores. The game also throws one last shit test at you with this giant laser. If you're too slow on the final stretch, you're gonna get hit. Not like you could speed up or anything, because it's on a completely flat path with no decline. And if that laser makes you fall, you get sent back. And it's gonna piss you off, because you were literally seconds away from the goal ring. It's kind of a mediocre note to end on for the last stage, but it could have been a whole lot worse. After getting to the end, we're shown the final boss, not really, of the game, the Egg Emperor, aka Robo J. Simpson. Now when I was a kid, I originally thought, whoa, Emperor. China has one of those, I think. And China's real. So Eggman's gotta be real too, right? I was a very dumb child. This guy will slam his sword slash attack screaming take bed, and if you don't play along with him, he charges at you in an unavoidable attack. It kind of repeats the same boss process as the Egg Hawk by moving and then stopping in a small arena to attack you, but more so for you to attack it. Do it enough times and the egg human dies. And he melts and turns into goo. Sonic talks to his buddies about how cool and epic they are, followed by Amy coming in and chasing Sonic away. And that's the end. Wow, that's just not gonna cut it, especially after the endings we've seen in other Sonic games. Hell, not even like the Adventure series, the ones from the classic games were more satisfying than this. The amount of story they could get across in still images was really something. And then seeing this, the game that was supposed to call back to the classic games the most. It's just really disappointing, honestly, but you know that's not the end. And Sega decides to go, haha, just kidding, please don't return this game, please play more. Now you can play any of the other teams. Not like anything was really stopping you before, but if anything, it's just as much of the same from what you already played. Almost one for one. Team Rose is just Team Sonic, but you stop halfway through the level, which actually gives you the best runtime per zone because none of them overstay their welcome. The story is that Sonic apparently took Big's frog and Cream's chow. I'm realizing now, but by saying these words in any other context outside of a Sonic game, you'd sound like a crazy person. You'd sound like a freak. You all go on the chase because Big and Cream want their pets back and Amy wants to touch Sonic. It's so bare bones, but in a game that's all about being the status quo story-wise, I'm not super surprised. Team Dark is just Team Sonic with more enemies. It's honestly really hard to justify this team outside of the CGI cutscenes, which really don't add much and potentially get retconned in the next game. No questions get answered, so really, why even have them here? To sell copies. People love Shadow, and Sonic Team knew they screwed up big time when they killed him off in his first game appearance. They were also going to bring back Gamma, even though he kinda isn't around. But Sonic Team was like, no, we can't desecrate 2 graves for 1 game. That's ridiculous and dumb. And we'll probably do it someday, but not today. Team Chaotix is mission mode, and it can't even stick to that. Sometimes the objective is to collect 10 of something, sometimes you have to collect all of something, and a few times you have to collect 1 of something, aka get to the end. If you've gotten tired from seeing these same 14 levels by now, get ready to see them a whole bunch more, because for some of these missions, you have to scour the stages from top to bottom, turning areas that were meant to be played quickly into slow runs back and forth to make sure you didn't miss a crab, or an enemy, or a chow, or a torch. It gets ridiculous. Sonic Heroes wasn't designed for this kind of gameplay style, and it really seems put together with duct tape and a glue stick, which makes it all the more bizarre that this is the direction they took for not just another Sonic game, but for the one that you play as Shadow. It's just a strange choice overall. Their story is cool though. They're a detective agency that gets commissioned by a voice on the radio to come rescue him and stop Eggman if it's not too much trouble. Most importantly, they'll get a fat pocket full of doubloons for their help, and that's what really gets them moving. Along the way, we get little hints of who the client is until it's revealed right at the very end that the client was none other than John Kramer. Eggman says he'll pay them in exposure, and Charmy B beats the shit out of him. All these guys wanted to do for their story was get a check. It's a cool change of pace from those who want to save the world, rescue Pet, find out about one's past. These guys just want to keep the lights on at home. But overall, looking at these teams, they seem more like optional DLC or factions that you pick once and stay with for the whole game. If it was this way, it would give some allure to maybe playing it again, but by being forced to go through the same game 4 times over completely ruins any mystique that each of these teams may have had, because we're shown that they do exactly the same things. If they all had unique levels, I'd love it. But as it is, it's just a really lazy way of extending the game's runtime, like, oh, you like Sonic Heroes, don't you? Play it 3 more times, beginning to end, and you might get a little 5-minute extra right before you lose your mind. That'll keep you busy. Have fun.
Oh wait, I forgot to mention, as a matter of fact...
But if you do beat this 2.5 hour game 4 times over and you get the Chaos Emeralds, then you do get a little 5-minute extra thing. What's that? A Chaos Emerald? Oh yeah, they're here. You want to know how you get them? So you get a key in the second act of each zone. You don't take any damage at all, and bring it to the end. Now you have to run in a tube with some of the most janky controls I've ever played in a video game. Like, I'm legitimately impressed. How did they fuck this up so bad? You boost down a tube trying to collect orbs to maintain your speed while avoiding bombs. You have to catch up with the emerald, and it won't slow down for you. The bombs bring you to a halt, and it's way too easy to veer off course and run around in circles or right into the explosives. If you take too long, you just gotta accept the fact that you need to beat the stage over again with another key, without getting hit, for one more shot. And then another. If you do get all the emeralds, and you beat the game 4 times, then you can finally have your little 5-minute extra thing. This is Last Story. It's weird that this game has a last story, almost like it's an adventure game or something. The story wasn't even that important for the game, so the fact that all of a sudden it makes it front and center, it just seems really strange and unfitting. The Chaotix talked to Eggman to find out if it really was Dark Goomba 718 who caused the 1995 Tokyo subway attacks.
It was.
Next thing we see is that all the teams gathered together around a battleship where atop the highest antenna is Metal Sonic, this time sporting a cool cloak and an updated design. He makes the ship and himself explode with a big lightning attack, and he builds a new body from the ground up. Now this is embarrassing, but I remember when I was in elementary school, I thought this cutscene was so cool that I recorded it on my little handheld camera with a 1-inch screen, and I showed it to my buddies and was like, hey, look what I saw. This actually happened. I was passing off a CGI cutscene for news footage and they bought it. I mean, not like it mattered. They probably forgot by the time they got home. They probably forgot like 5 minutes after I showed them. But after he builds himself up and Eggman's like, oh man, oh, if only we had the Chaos Emeralds, that would be based. And everyone just has them. You then take turns beating Metal Madness by attacking the blinking buttons on his body with the character that isn't represented by it. So for example, if it's blue, you can't hurt him as Sonic, and the same goes for red or yellow. This is a cool change of pace, and by making it the only boss where you stand in the same place, it's kinda able to have a bit more spectacle. Metal Madness will shoot fire, blast containment missiles, whip his tail, and more. Once you beat this phase with all 3 teams, he transforms into Metal Overlord, flies away with Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles following closely behind. Here you have to build up team blasts in any way you can. By repeatedly attacking, you get closer to a blast, but you also have to make sure that you have enough rings to beat the guy, because every single second, the rings tick down. He can still attack you and even pause time just to slow you down and take the upper hand. After enough team blasts, Metal Sonic cries about being real, and we're finally shown the last cutscene of the game. It's a better ending than the individual teams' last cutscenes, but this one just kinda seems unearned. Everything's okay now, but it didn't really seem like anything was wrong to begin with. It's a weird ending that just kinda feels anticlimactic, but it has cool character moments with everyone either running off to either chase adventure, chase someone else, tiptoe out in Eggman's case, or chase after someone to get money, in the Chaotix case. Sonic Heroes is the definition of a mixed bag. Every praise I give it has little seedlings of criticism, but for its aspects that I critique, I also understand that there's elements of them that I enjoy. It's fun, but its design is so flawed. It's short, but in the longest way possible. Some of the things it does I've never seen another game do before or since. For better and especially for worse. It may be the first or second Sonic game that I've ever played. It's not my favorite, but it really holds a special place in my heart. I get really sentimental about games that are important to my development, and I know that I'm biased, so I probably went a little bit easy on the game. But I will never be able to deny that this game made me enjoy the Sonic series more than I originally did. I loved this game as a kid, and while I recognize now that it's not perfect, I still have fun with it regardless. Top to bottom, warts and all, I love this game, even if it's more for what it represents to me instead of the content itself. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching until the end. I hope you liked it. If you want to support the vids like this or the projects that I'm making, I've got a Patreon or YouTube memberships if you prefer that. You get early access to the work that I'm doing and some other cool perks, so check it out. Also got some cool shirts and stickers on Redbubble, so maybe look into it if you want. Might have something you like. But thanks again, and I'll see you next time.